Iron?
Yes?
Do you know what the time is?
I'd say it's about brew o'clock. Ladies and gentlemen, soldiers and scouts, let me please welcome you to another episode of Iron Brews. Now, before we start, please allow me to apologise in advance because last episode I made a mistake. Well, not last episode really, but in the time in between episodes. Now, if you remember, last episode I was teaching you how to homebrew beer from kit form. And I told you that the first stage of this process would take 1 week to complete. The next stage you'd need to do would be covered in this video 1 month later. Now, I'm filming this 3 weeks after the first process was done, which means I'm 2 weeks late for what I needed to film. With me so far? I've done what I needed to do, but I didn't film it, so I couldn't show you. Still with me? Basically, the long and the short of it is, you're not going to see me using the actual beer to do what I need to do. What you're going to see me using is a stand-in and another stand-in. I hope you're following this, because I'm really not. Anyway, let's try and get on with it. I'll try and explain it as best I can, and hopefully you can all follow. Okay then, hopefully as you guys remember, last episode we left off at the point you had just transferred 32 pints of beer into your primary fermentation barrel. Now hopefully, in the week between the last episode and the supposed time of this episode, you should have been checking that beer with this, your hydrometer. Remember that little fella? Tells you the specific gravity of your beer, how much alcohol's in it, and when to transfer it from barrel A to barrel B. Now, I didn't show you how to check it, but it's very, very simple. With this particular beer, the gravity it needs to reach is 1014 degrees. And it needs to stay at that gravity for 2 days before you transfer it to your secondary fermentation barrel. Now then, very simple to check. You've got your little marking gauges along here with your numbers telling you your degrees of gravity. Sterilise it and drop it in. It'll bob up and down, and where it stays is what the gravity of your beer is. Now unfortunately, a byproduct of it, you get some horrible scum float to the top of your beer. Don't worry about it, it's natural. But now then, assuming that my stand-in here has reached 1014 degrees of gravity, that is when you need to transfer to your secondary fermentation barrel. This one, if you remember, is your pressurised barrel. So it's got a screw cap top with a safety valve on the top to allow gas to escape if it becomes over-pressurised. That's because in your secondary stage of fermentation, the pressure and the fermentation process releases a lot of gas, which obviously the pressure builds up, and while some is good, too much, and you have a very, very bad mess all over your walls and floor. Right. So regardless of that, what you now need to do is transfer from your primary barrel to your secondary barrel. Now, as you can probably see, my secondary barrel is currently in use with the beer which I should have been using to show you in this episode. So, like I said, this isn't real beer. This is. So I need you to use the most powerful tool you soldiers out there have in your inventory. I'm going to need you to use your imagination. And trust me, it's going to take quite a lot of imagination. Because you need to pretend that this is that. You with me? I don't blame you if you're not either, because I'm not really following this. Anyway, regardless of this problem, we're going to have to carry on. Right then. Now, as I've said, you need to transfer beer from barrel A to barrel B for secondary fermentation. There is another way of doing this. Rather than transferring to barrels, you can transfer to bottles. You can buy these quite easily from some of the websites I've previously mentioned. All they are is standard looking beer bottles with caps you fit on yourself. You transfer the beer from your primary barrel into the bottle, follow the procedure I'm about to show you, and leave for exactly the same amount of time. Personally, I don't use this procedure because your bottles take up a lot of room, they're not cheap to buy, they are handy for transport. I mean, obviously you can't transport that around too easily, but I prefer having it at home. It's each to their own, really. Now then, transferring your beer from your barrel to your secondary barrel, okay? Remember, this is your secondary barrel, this is that. Yeah. Right. Very simple, very nice easy piece of physics actually. What you need is one of these. A nice, long, hollow, flexible plastic tube. Also, what you might want is one of these. This is a siphon filter. All it is essentially, this goes down to the bottom of your barrel where the waste sediment from your fermentation process builds up. Now you don't want that. That's your dead yeast and byproducts from your fermentation, and you don't want to take them into your secondary barrel. So what this little filter does is it sits down the bottom and your sediment can't get in there because it has to go up to get there, but all your lovely good beer can. So what you do, now remember, you have sterilised these. If you haven't, you're dirty and you disgust me. So obviously first of all you sterilise them, and then you slip them down into your barrel. Now, siphoning's easy. All you have to do is suck on one end, make sure your primary barrel is higher than your secondary barrel, and by a wonderful process called gravity, your beer will go from barrel A to barrel B. Now, in case you get some beer in your mouth while you're doing this, the best thing to do is to sterilise your mouth. Now, I would not advise drinking your sterilisation solution. I really wouldn't. Best thing to drink is a nice spirit. Swirl it around your mouth. You can do it 1, 2, 3, 4 times just to make sure your mouth is nice and sterile. As long as it's clean. Now, siphoning. Don't know whether you can see this or not, the beer is currently transferring between the barrels. In fact, if you really wish to see, there you go. Now then, you could, if you're very careful, you can simply pick up that barrel and pour it very, very gently and slowly into this one. Personally, I wouldn't advise doing it. Overly moving that barrel will stir up the sediment in the bottom, which obviously then becomes waterborne again, and as you're pouring will go into your secondary fermentation barrel, and that can taint your beer. Don't want tainted beer, it's not nice. Now then, as I said, when it's in the secondary barrel, so this one, that one, it becomes pressurised. This is why it has a safety valve on the top to try and allow the excess gas to escape. Now sometimes there can be a problem with this. Sometimes the safety valve does not work. Maybe after you've used it a few times, the seal's gone on it or something like that. You need to replace the caps. That's not much of a problem. They're not too expensive and they're easily available. The other problem can be if they're not working and the pressure builds up. Now I used the example of exploding earlier. That could probably happen. Maybe. Maybe someone out there knows it. Hasn't happened to me, but I have had a problem with mine. The safety valve didn't work, and around the spigot seal here, where the spigot tap goes into the barrel, my beer started to leak. Now, you're meant to put these barrels somewhere nice, quiet, where they'll be undisturbed. And so it was undisturbed for 2 weeks. There was a lovely civilization of mould growing around it by the time I got back. In fact, I think it had become so advanced it developed democracy. Anyway, the best thing to do in this situation is when you leave it for its secondary fermentation period, put a tray under it just to catch anything. You don't want to risk it. Now then, the other thing is, after it's fermented, after it's sat for 2 weeks, obviously this is only this beer takes 2 weeks, some may take 3 weeks in primary fermentation. After it's fermented, and you've drunk down to about, maybe that far, the pressure in the barrel will become less and less and less. Now, yes, this is good because there's less pressure, but it's bad for one reason. It's the pressure which forces the beer out of your spigot and into your mug. So, to combat this, the little safety valve on the top doubles up as a CO2 inlet valve. Now then, imagine that this cap here is that cap there, with your little brass valve on the top. When your pressure in your barrel starts to lower, all you have to do, slip this, a CO2 canister, into one of these, like so, screw it down onto that brass screw fitting there. This will slowly release CO2 back into your barrel until it repressurises at its optimum pressure. This will mean you can start to get your beer back out of your barrel. Alright, you with me? Good. Right then, so once your siphoning is done, you remove that tube from your secondary barrel. You don't need that anymore, you don't need your primary barrel anymore. You can take them away, clean them, store them until you need them again. Right, so you've got your 32 pints of beer sitting here. What you now need to do, you need to add sugar. Sugar is what the yeast particles which remain in your beer feeds on. That is what kickstarts your secondary fermentation process. For this particular batch, this particular box set, it recommends using half a teaspoon per pint, right? So if you do the maths, 32 pints, half a teaspoon per pint, that's 16 teaspoons, okay? So what you do, you get your 16 teaspoons of sugar, preferably a fine caster sugar, something like that. Don't use anything too coarse, it takes too long to dissolve. The longer the process of dissolving takes, the slower the chemical release of the sugars, and so it alters your fermentation process slightly. So the finer and smaller the particles, the quicker it dissolves, and the better the process is. So you get your sugar, you dump it in. Now if you want to, you can stir this around just to give it a kickstart, or you can leave it, it doesn't really matter, it still dissolves. Then all you do, you get your screw cap lid. Remember, that is the one with the safety valve, not the one without. Screw it down onto the top. Imagination. Screw it down to the top. Take it away. Leave it somewhere cool and dry. Not freezing. Not damp. These things affect it. Cool, or, you know, moderately warm. Don't leave them next to a radiator. Again, the heat is a catalyst for the fermentation, so if you leave it near heat, it will ferment too quickly. That's when you get to the exploding beer barrel stage. Alright? Leave it somewhere cool, or moderately cool and dry. This batch, again, requires 2 weeks. Every batch is different, please remember this. Every different kind of kit beer will have its own different little things about it. That's what makes beers different. If they weren't different, they'd all be the same. That's logic, that is. So some beers, your gravity will be slightly different. It'll be 1016, maybe 1010. For some of them, your primary fermentation will be a little bit longer. For some of them, your secondary fermentation will be a little bit longer. This one is 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, it's ready. In 2 weeks, 32 pints, or considerably less now, sitting in a barrel, waiting for you to drink. Trust me, it's worth it. All you've got to be able to do is sit still for 2 weeks and wait for it. Please don't drink it before it's ready. It tastes disgusting, I know. Right then. Best of luck, soldiers. See you in the new year. Graham?
What?
I got 32 pints of Bisto gravy with 16 teaspoons of salt in it. What the hell am I meant to do with this now?
God damn it, Iron.